Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with host Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you never miss an episode. Search for us on your favorite podcast app, or you can find the podcast on jimmyhinton.org and findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so we can spread the word. If you would like to support us and get exclusive rewards, go to patreon.com/speakingout. Find a tier that best fits you and join as a patron of the podcast. Now let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast with hosts Jimmy Hinton.
Oh, and Jimmy's mom, Clara.
Well, this week we turned Clara's microphone on.
We did.
We apologized for last week's little debacle. We debated whether to re-record it, and it just goes to show that we are human and we make mistakes. We always do sound checks before we start, and last week we were in a hurry, and we had things to do and places to go, and we just jumped right into it, started recording,
and didn't give it a thought.
Yeah, so her microphone was off, so we were able to run it through post-processing and get it enough where my microphone was able to recover enough of your audio, and we equalized it to where it was usable. It wasn't great. So anyway, we apologize for that, and
we did not re-record because we felt we couldn't catch the moment.
Right.
We just couldn't.
Yeah.
But we're good to go today. We're good to go.
Yeah, we're sorry about that. And the other thing, I wanted to just start this podcast off again by thanking our patrons who every month they support us, and not just financially, but they encourage us.
Right.
I've gotten several messages. Well, we have gotten several messages over the last couple weeks directly from our patrons, and we love having patrons.
We do. It gives us that personal connection even more so than we have just with the podcast itself. And when we can hear feedback, especially from our patrons, and get to know each other on a more personal level, it makes the podcast better.
It does. So if you are a regular listener and you would like to become a patron and get some of the rewards, we don't talk about that a lot because we're not really into self-promotion stuff, but we don't take sponsors for the podcast. So we decided to go the route of Patreon, and we absolutely love it. We have no regrets.
We do. No.
But there are several different levels, different tiers with different rewards for each of those tiers. So it's not like you give money and then, just that money goes into an abyss and you have no idea what's happening. You become part of the podcast.
The building of this podcast, actually, from level 1, which we are going to be talking about today in our exclusive, which
only goes to our patrons.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's some of the stuff. You get exclusive rewards. And, each month we do a live Q&A for some of our patrons based on different tiers. So, there's cool stuff, and they get to interact with us and talk to us on a deeply personal level. Right. So it's just a lot of fun, and
it is.
We enjoy it. So we're going to get back to part 2 of trusting. And I was thinking about this and preparing for this just a little bit ago. Mm-hmm. And you told me something whenever I was pretty young, and you probably don't even remember it. But
I probably do not.
But this has prepared me for so many different catastrophes in life, both in church work and in life. You've told me from a young age, learn to trust God and don't put your trust in man, because man will always disappoint you.
I have told that to all of you kids numerous times, because it's so true. When we trust in people, at some point in time, we will get disappointed.
Yeah.
God, however, never disappoints us.
Yeah.
Ever.
And that has been such a true statement, because, what I found is that even people who I thought that I could trust, who I should be able to trust, people who vowed to, stand by my side and we're going to stick with you no matter what. Those are usually the first people who abandon you, right? And
yes,
I think for them it's not intentional. I think it's just that people want to be supportive and they want to be rock solid friends. And so we hear the words and the words sound right, whether it's coming from a church leader, whether it's coming from a friend, whether it's coming from a family member, the words sound right. And so our heart tends to migrate to those words and it attaches to those words because we need trustworthy people.
Trust, but there's a cost that goes with a person being a trustworthy person.
Yeah.
And we can all be fired up initially and say, Jimmy, I'm going to be here with you to the bitter end. I don't care what happens. I don't care how hard it gets. I am with you. I will be your cheerleader. I'm going to be your encourager. And then I end up falling by the wayside because I didn't realize there's a cost in being that trustworthy person.
Yeah.
A big cost.
Yeah. I talk about this as a minister, as a pastor of a church. I talk about this phenomenon of, the cardboard testimonies, that we have this addiction in ministry. We have this addiction to these instantaneous transformations where on the one side of the card, we put who the person was, and then we flip that around, and then it's this amazing transformation, and this is who they are in Christ now. And, we talked about this in an episode before, but, we parade those people across the stage, and it elicits something inside of us emotionally where it feels good because it looks good.
Sure.
And so as ministers, we get addicted to those cardboard transformations because it requires very little of us. And you're absolutely right. There is a great cost to being a person who's trustworthy, who's somebody can depend on no matter what.
I had a person call me out probably 2 years ago with this very issue that we're talking about. She had gone through a terrible time with abuse, left her husband, was raising her children alone, and she had been emailing back and forth with me. We had a couple phone calls, and I made this statement, I'll be with you, I'll help you through this, and I'll make sure that you're in a good place. And I meant that when I said it, but I didn't follow through, especially not to the level that she understood I would. And boy, she called me out on it. She reamed me out. She said, you haven't been here. You are not here with me. You are not helping me. When I call out for help, it might be days until you respond. And I felt miserable about that, but I also had an awakening. I'm very careful not to make that promise anymore if I can't keep it.
I think that's really important too. Yeah. I think that's very important because it's easy to say that, and it's easy to feel like we mean it.
I really meant it, but I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Time, my work, my life, things got in the way, and it was days until I could respond. That didn't mean I wasn't praying for her, but often people have needs that you use the example before of a person going to an emergency room bleeding. They don't need you to tell them, just kind of sit and wait. 3 days from now, I'll get a bandage and fix you up. They need help now.
Right.
And I wasn't that person to help her. And I should not have made that type of commitment of trust with her.
Well, I think that's an important lesson too. And, for those of us who should become trustworthy people, it takes an incredible amount of work, but there's this concept in business that's called, it's called scaling, right? And,
yes.
And it's basically taking an assessment of kind of this overall big snapshot picture of everything that's going on within your business.
Mm-hmm.
And then you begin to scale that.
Right.
And scaling means cutting things. It means
Mm-hmm.
getting rid of things, not saying that those things aren't important. But there comes a point where we become so bloated in our lives.
Right.
And we take on so many responsibilities that we can't be trustworthy people. It's not that we're not trustworthy. It's that we can't.
Not on that level. And I call it chunking it down. We have to prioritize, not chunk down. Otherwise, we become nothing. We're good to no one if we get to that point where we are trying to give on that high level. Now, I think there are levels of trustworthiness.
Yeah.
But there is a cost on every level. And I think probably the best thing we could do is right up front, make it clear to a person, I'm going to pray for you daily, and do it. Mm-hmm. If that's what we can do, I will pray for you, Jimmy, daily.
Yeah. I would say don't overpromise.
Right. That's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. Which was my issue with this woman. And it really smacked me right between the eyes. Really did. Because I didn't realize, was I trustworthy? Absolutely. Was I trustworthy to the level that she wanted me and expected me to be? Absolutely not. I had given her that idea, though, that I would be.
Yeah.
And it hurt her very much. And I didn't mean to hurt her.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, I think that's important, too, as we talk to you guys out there, just kind of flipping that perspective a little bit. When you need a trustworthy person, when your trust has been broken on so many levels by people who should have been trustworthy, who violated that trust in whatever capacity. We talked last week about how that damages our ability to trust again, and that's fully understandable.
Does, yes.
So, I would say for those of you whose trust has been broken over and over again, start by maybe defining different levels of trust that you need.
Yes.
Because the reality is not everybody can be a person at this level because their schedules don't allow for it. Their life doesn't allow for it. So maybe define different levels of trust that you need from somebody to just hang out with and just let your hair down.
Absolutely. Have a cup of coffee with. I need to trust you enough that I can have a weekly cup of coffee with you and just go over my life a little bit.
Yeah. And that's level. Not, at that level of trust, that's not pouring your guts out and telling your whole life story and all your troubles, because that's not really fair to that person either.
They're not there, but there are levels. And I think when we talk about trustworthiness within the house of God, within the church, within ministry, there's been so much hurt done because if I come to you, Jimmy, and I do pour my guts out and I say, Jimmy, this is what's happened in my life, and you're upholding this person as a man of God, and he's been abusing me, or he's been abusing my children for years and years, and you have taken that, you've listened to my story, my life, and you do nothing with it, or you make light of it, or you are non-committal with what I've told you, that's a breach of trust that is beyond hurtful.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, right.
Well, I think that's why it's important for us to define what the levels of trust are that we need and who the people are who fit into those categories. And that takes a little bit of work on our part, but I think it's very rewarding when that happens. And I've done that.
It is.
Unfortunately, I've done that probably like most people by trial and error, where I've poured my guts out to people thinking that they were trustworthy. And then, I'll tell somebody in complete confidence, and then I find out they shared it with somebody else. Yep. And when I talk to them about it, it's, I told them because I wanted somebody else to be praying. Yeah. I didn't ask you to get other people to pray for me about this. I trusted you with information, and you broke that trust.
So
you
hurtful,
betrayed me.
isn't it? And I think you're right. Most of us learn by trial and error.
Yeah.
Those are lessons I learned very early on as a minister's wife.
Mm-hmm.
I learned to choose very carefully who I shared my innermost thoughts with.
Yeah.
Very, very carefully, because within that circle, there's a lot of buzz goes on within churches. And I found out quite quickly I needed to be very careful who I used on that, to trust on that high level.
Yeah.
But, that didn't mean that I couldn't trust others on a lower level, which we need. We need all of that. But for that utmost level, be careful, people, or you will get hurt. You get burned. Yeah.
And I think we can identify over time, and it does take time, but you can identify who the extremely trustworthy people are.
Yes.
And I mentioned last week, I have quite literally one person who I will tell anything to.
Right.
And I know, one, that he will listen, two, that he will not judge, three, that if it's anything where I need self-correction, he's going to hold me accountable. He's going to tell me. So it's not like,
Right.
I can do whatever I want and tell this person and he's going to be cool with it. That's not our relationship at all.
And it shouldn't be.
Right.
That highest level of trust is that person who will rein you in and steer you on the right path again if you veer off. And you are a blessed man to have that one person. Not everybody has that person. Yeah. I have 3 people that I will go to, but I don't have that one on that highest level yet, which is kind of weird for me to say, but it's true.
Not really, though. I mean, it's taken me years to be able to identify.
I don't have that top level person yet, but there are 3 that I know I can go to and spill almost everything with and know that they will help me, but I don't have that. You are a very blessed person. And there again, I think it takes discernment on our part, especially when we've been brutally hurt before by people within the church.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
that's where we expect the most trust. I mean, let's face it.
I think too, within the counseling scenario too, we tend to put our trust in people who have degrees and who, they've done all the work and they have counseling boards that they're accountable to and on and on and on. And so people assume that because somebody is a licensed therapist that they're trustworthy. And I want to shout from the rooftop, may it not be so. I've heard too many stories from people, from family members who have horrific experiences with therapists.
Yes.
And so, I would say along with that as well, find somebody who's trustworthy, and don't be afraid to fire a therapist. If you have somebody where that relationship is just not working, get rid of them.
Finding that trust, building that trust, whatever you want to call, is a journey. Yeah. And it's kind of a stair-step journey. You build a little at a time. I don't think you should ever go full force into any type of relationship with that complete trust except with God.
Yeah.
God, we know, is the ultimate one that we can trust. But with others, it's a very discerning journey. We need to take it step by step.
Yeah.
Or, that trust, when we get knocked down the ladder again, it seems like we fall a little harder each time. It hurts a little worse each time.
Well, and I hear this often, and I'm not poking fun at all. I totally understand it, but there are some people who just, you sit down on a park bench beside them, and they're gonna tell you everything and stuff that you're like, I didn't want to know this. Yep. I didn't need to know this. Mm-hmm. And some people just have that personality, and then they'll, some of those people, not all of them, but some of those people will come back and be like, I just don't understand why I keep getting hurt.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, there's got to be this level of discernment with all of us.
It does.
With who we entrust certain information with.
I think that's your heart screaming for someone to listen. I'm kind of laughing because I made that error. It's been about, 12, 15 years ago. And I remember this person that I had just met. We're having coffee and I spilled my guts about everything. Don't ask me why, except that I didn't know who else to talk to. And the look of shock and horror was like something I'll never forget. And this person said, "Why did you tell me all that?"
I think sometimes we forget too, and people in advocacy, survivors of abuse, people who've been to hell and back. We get calloused and we get conditioned to hearing this kind of stuff.
We
so
do.
It's not shocking. There's not much that's shocking to us anymore. And sometimes we forget that your average person hasn't ever heard any of this stuff before.
That's right where I was, Jimmy.
And so we just kind of blurt it out. We're just like, we just talk about it like, then this guy was, he raped this kid over here. And we just speak very matter-of-factly.
Because that's our language now, and it's not everybody else's language.
That's right. And it can be very traumatizing to people.
Right.
And we need to remember that too. So, like I said, there are different layers of trustworthiness.
Right.
And there are people who fit into different categories, and it should be that way.
Yes.
It has to be that way.
And it is, because we're part of what's called life. That's it. Not everybody can deal with the really hard stuff, number one. Number two, not everybody's going to even begin to understand where, if you've been, for instance, when I talk about my home relationship as a child, I watched my mother and father physically beating each other. And I can tell already that makes you uncomfortable. I can tell. Yeah, it does.
Yeah, whatever.
Yeah, it does. But as a 4-year-old, I can remember the very first brutal fight they had, where the table was overturned. I can still see the jar of olives spilling olive juice on the floor. Now, a little 4-year-old, you have a child that age. Picture that, and lamps that went flying across the room and making holes in the wall. Not everybody can deal with that. Not everybody has lived that. To some, they'll go, yeah, okay, well, I saw bullets flying. But I have to use caution when I talk about that, because that it's traumatizing to some people to think that, especially if they know you and know the situation, the more they get to know it. So,
I would say, on a really practical level, I would say, start off by knowing what your expectations are, as it relates to different layers, different layers of trust and trustworthiness. Know what your expectations are, and then slowly test the waters. And I think that's perfectly okay.
Yeah.
I think it's, in fact,
I think it's necessary.
Even Jesus, I think about when he sent his disciples out. It's really interesting because people don't really talk about this. They talk about the poverty part, and they come from a faith angle. When Jesus sends his disciples out, and he literally sends them with the clothes on their back. Right. He says, don't take an extra bag with you. Don't take an extra tunic. Don't take extra money. Don't take extra food. And people spin this as if it's just Jesus saying, put your trust in God. God delivers your daily bread, and so put all your trust in him. And almost as if Jesus is testing his disciples to see if they really trust him. I don't think that's the lesson in that. At least it's not the only lesson. Because he says something else that's really interesting. In that context, he says, when you go along the road and you're going into these towns, greet no one as you go along the way. Well, that's interesting, isn't it?
It's very interesting.
He's literally telling them not to stop and talk to people when they're traveling on the road. Don't even say hi to them. That's fascinating to me. It doesn't really give an explanation. He just says, don't greet anybody on the road. And then he tells them when they go into the house, when people invite you in, if they accept you, stay there.
Right.
But if they don't, he doesn't say try to reason with them, try to build trust over time, try to get them to see where you're coming from, try to get them to really buy into your mission, why you're here, why you're visiting, what you're talking about. He doesn't say any of that. He says, take your sandals and wipe the dust off of them and leave and go to the next house.
Get rolling.
And then if they abandon you, go to the next house. And if the town rejects you, go to the next town. Leave the town.
Yep.
And I think that's really practical, really wise advice, because we get caught up in these relationships and we feel obligated, especially as Christians. We feel obligated because we've been guilted to say, as a Christian, you got to talk to everybody.
Yeah.
You got to be friends with everybody. You got to be friendly to everybody. No, we don't.
Right. Yeah.
Sometimes it's a waste of our time, and maybe that's a harsh way of putting it.
I think
but to stop it, to talk to everybody and let them suck the life out of you.
And also, they had a mission. Jesus sent them on a mission. They had a goal. They had something to do.
And it wasn't to make friends and sing Kumbaya at campfires along the way.
And we forget that sometimes in life. We get distracted by everything and everyone. I'm guilty of that.
Oh, we all are.
I am really
every one of us
guilty
are.
of that. I like people. I enjoy people. I enjoy helping people, encouraging people. But I lose sight of my goal sometimes.
Yeah.
That is the bigger picture. And I think Jesus was teaching them, here's the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Stick to it.
Well, what happens, I think, when you stop and every person you have, it turns into a conversation, and because you feel obligated.
Well,
to.
Everybody has a story. Everybody has a hurt.
Right.
Everybody has a pain. Everybody.
Yeah, we all do.
Everybody.
But I think when that becomes our focus, this relationship building and all this stuff, I think what happens is we have what's called in ministry, it's called mission drift, where you begin to drift away from the mission.
Okay,
and even on this podcast, like our podcast, our specialty, our area of expertise is child sexual abuse. And specifically preventing abuse, really understanding, getting into the mind of abusers. And people constantly are asking us, hey, can you talk about this? Can you talk about this? We may be able to mention it. And, it's not like we're hardcore child sexual abuse only.
Right.
But there comes a point where we have to limit what we're going to talk about.
We have to stick to our purpose.
Yeah, because we don't want to experience mission drift.
Right.
So I think that's really important. And I think Jesus's message isn't just, put your faith in me and
follow me.
God's going to provide and all that stuff. I don't think that's the only message. I think his message is you've been given a very clear mission. Don't spend your time talking with people and trying to get along with everybody, and because that's not your mission.
Not going to happen anyway.
Making friends with everybody, having a relationship with everybody. Your mission is to free the oppressed, to feed the poor, and to tell the people the good news that comes from a Savior who's going to rescue them from these situations.
These men were on that higher level of trust.
Yeah.
They were on a level, they were walking with Jesus.
Yeah.
They were there. There are others who could be the conversationalist, who could greet the people along the way.
That's right. Yeah. That's exactly right. And there are people who fit those categories. And so we just have to know. We have to know and be discerning. And, when his disciples went in, I think it's such a powerful message. Don't spend your time trying to establish this trust and, to really get to know people, right? These churches, we have these lock-ins, and it's like all are invited, and we encourage you to get to know everybody on this deeply personal level. I don't encourage people to do that because you're going to get burned doing it.
Right. And that the whole purpose of this 2-part series on trust is to teach us to use wisdom, discernment, and caution so that we don't get further hurt.
Right.
And so that we can build our trust in Jesus, in God, our Father.
Yeah. So, hopefully that all makes sense. We're just trying to be deeply practical and say it's okay. It's okay for you to not pour your heart out to everybody.
I think truly,
it's okay to be
Jimmy,
guarded.
Right. And rightly so. And I think you and I know so many people who are listening to this podcast who have been brutally hurt because they have trusted, placed their trust in someone who was not trustworthy.
Yeah.
So we're just trying to caution others to prevent more hurt that way.
So at the end of the day, I think, I know it is definitely possible to find someone.
Oh yeah.
It's going to be a very small number.
Mm-hmm.
Trust me. And that's okay.
Right.
But to find somebody who is completely trustworthy, that is possible. And we mentioned it last week, and our truth bomb is wrapped up in this. That brings such tremendous freedom to know that you have that person who is going to listen to you, who's going to invest in their time. They're going to invest in your time. They're going to listen to you. They're going to hold you accountable. They're not going to be biased. They're able to both be a friend and to not be biased, where they're just like, oh, okay, and that clouds their judgment.
A special person.
It really does.
It does.
But it is possible, and when that comes, I can't begin to express to you how much weight has been lifted off of my shoulders, where I feel like I can live life again, and I can not look at people with these lenses of always being suspect, because that's how I lived for several years.
Exactly right.
Where everybody was suspect, and it's a crappy way to live. To be quite honest,
it's terrible, and that's what broken trust results in. But trustworthiness results in this peace that we're talking about.
Yeah, peace and discernment.
Peace in it. Yes. Yeah.
So we will leave you with that truth bomb, that building trust is worth the effort. The end result will be peace, peace, peace. And it is wonderful to live that way.
It is. Yes.
Thank you for tuning into this episode, and we'll catch you next round.
Thanks again for listening to today's episode. Thank you to our patrons who make the podcast possible. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker and search for the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast in your favorite podcast app. Be sure to hit subscribe and rate the show. If you believe in what we do, consider supporting the podcast by becoming a patron. And check out the cool rewards our patrons receive. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.